Although the fictional world is often turned to tales of wonder, you might be surprised to hear just how many incredible narratives are based on true events. As it turns out, history can be pretty entertaining when you know where to look. So join us as we journey through the most mind-blowing stories our planet has to offer. Number 1. The best signalman the world has ever seen. Our first story takes place in the setting of 19th century South Africa, where a man by the name of James White could be found working for the Cape Town Port Elizabeth railway station. Known locally as the Jumper, James would often leap from carriage to carriage in an attempt to complete his daily duties as a signalman. And while poor old James was careful the majority of the time, one unfortunate incident changed his life forever. After slipping from atop one of the trains, James fell to the ground, breaking both of his legs. Worse yet, since the medical field wasn't exactly pumping at that point in time, doctors decided that the Jumper would have to have both legs amputated in an effort to save his life. Suffice to say, his days of jumping between train carriages were over. Not being able to perform his duties to the best of his past abilities anymore, James decided to look for an assistant to help him get by. And that's where Jack came in. But there was something very different about Jack. You see, he was actually a baboon. And as crazy as it sounds for a train station to employ a baboon, this is precisely what they did. In fact, Jack was kept on the payroll for a grand total of 9 years. And as it turns out, this was a pretty great decision at the end of the day, as Jack had never made a single mistake while on the job. According to reports, the furry friend earned around 20 cents a day, which is more than the majority of other baboons are making even now. Unfortunately for Jack, though, his service ended in 1890 with him being diagnosed with and eventually passing away from tuberculosis. Number 2. The song that never ends. As Albert Einstein would say, time is a relative thing, and nobody knows this better than someone forced to listen to a musician they despise. Oh, the things we do for our significant others. But as it turns out, the longest playtime of a musical number blows any experience like this out of the park. No idea what we're talking about? Then follow us to Germany, where philosophers and musicians alike combined their brains to come up with an extraordinary idea. For some or other reason, they wanted to find a place where they could play John Cage's organ squared ASLSP on a repeat for around 639 years. After discovering that St. Burcardi Church had an opening, the stage was set and the composer's instructions to play the track as slow as possible were followed to a T. Since the performance began in 2001, you'll be able to catch it anytime between then and the year 2640. Suffice to say, this easily qualifies as the longest performance in the history of the world. But why the Germans decided to do this, we have no idea. We're sure that the composer would have preferred a statue or something similar instead. Number 3. The uplifting story of Chicago. For inhabitants of the region today, Chicago is the home of the Bears and the Cubs. But back in the 19th century, things looked pretty different. And as it turns out, the city was only a few feet above the waters of Lake Michigan. And it goes without saying, but this produced a number of problems for those who wanted to live there. For one thing, the city battled to drain water from its streets when heavy rains came pouring down. And since this created a muddy mess that would make transportation next to impossible, something clearly had to be done. Unfortunately for the citizens of Chicago, though, the incorporation of a proper drainage system was next to impossible, considering just how close the city was to the waters of Lake Michigan. The only viable option was to somehow raise Chicago to new heights. That was surely impossible, right? Well, it turns out that's exactly what the city planners decided to do. And while it took a whole 2 decades to raise the city a couple of feet to allow for a proper drainage system to be installed, this by no means meant that life in the city ground to a halt. In fact, life continued on as normal, with large groups of workers being employed to slowly raise each and every building a couple of inches every so often. They should call Chicago the city of patience, because that's one heck of a wait. Number 4. The luckiest woman around. Although we currently live in a world of technology and science, the majority of us still believe in concepts like luck. Get a bad hand in poker or fail to catch the train on time, well, that's probably because you're an unlucky person. At least that's what a lot of people will tell you as you wait for the next train to show up. If there was one person who never suffered from a catastrophic case of bad luck, though, it was the Polish-German paraglider Ewa Wisniewska, who is still considered to be the luckiest person to ever live. Back on Valentine's Day Day in 2007, Wisniewska decided to go up and practice for the paragliding championships that were fast approaching. But since the weather was pretty horrendous, she had second thoughts about actually taking the leap. After convincing herself that she hadn't traveled up there for nothing though, she fought against her gut feeling and took off, only to be carried away in an updraft of 2 thunderclouds. Believe it or not, but this resulted in her being raised to a height of around 32,000 feet, which is equivalent to 9,700 meters. And since the low temperature and lack of oxygen at that height can be perilous on its own, it didn't take long for Wisniewska to lose consciousness. Upon reaching the top of the updraft, Wisniewska subconsciously steered out of the storm, lowering herself to a breathable portion of the atmosphere and awakening before it was too late. As it turns out, the crazy paraglider ended up landing successfully, with a film by the name of Miracle in the Storm being made to document this feat of luck. Number 5. Hoover, the talking seal. For the next story on our list, we have to travel back to 1971, which is when a man by the name of George Swallow stumbled upon a seal that was anxiously awaiting company on the seashore. As it turns out, the seal's mother had unfortunately passed on and was awaiting the same fate before George decided to take it home and call him Hoover. Slowly but surely, the pair developed a friendship that lasted years, with Hoover going on to mimic the various catchphrases that George would repeat on the odd occasion. But with each passing day, Hoover grew bigger and bigger, finally being far too large to keep at home. So with a heavy heart, George decided to donate the friendly seal to the New England Aquarium. Hoover didn't quite understand why his owner had decided to abandon him though, which resulted in him remaining quiet and reclusive for a grand total of 5 years at the aquarium. But once he grew used to the other aquatic life around him, as well as the various workers, Hoover finally began to talk again. According to reports, some of his favorite catchphrases included "hello there" and "come on over here," making him one of the most famous seals in all of the 7 seas. Number 6. The Flight of Fitzpatrick. Before the world knew that a talking seal would be making its appearance on the scene, a brave American pilot by the name of Thomas Fitzpatrick wanted to go down in history. So after betting that he would be able to land a single-engine airplane on the streets of New York, he went on to achieve this by stealing one from a school of aeronautics in New Jersey. Luckily for him, the landing was soft and the punishment less than expected. Since the owner of the aircraft was impressed, he failed to press charges against Fitzpatrick, who only received a $100 US fine from the NYPD. But the pilot didn't know how to stop while he was ahead. When a barman didn't believe the story that Fitzpatrick had told him, he said that he would prove it once and for all, taking off again in a stolen airplane and landing just outside of the Yeshiva University. Suffice to say, the NYPD didn't take kindly to the repeated offense, Thomas Fitzpatrick eventually being sentenced to a total of 6 months in prison. Definitely not worth the point he wanted to make that day. Number 7. The end of heartbreak. Last but not least, we have a story coming out of Tubu Zoo in Japan, which features some of the cutest penguins you've ever seen before. Cute Grape-kun and Midori, who after being together for almost a decade, were transported to the zoo back in 2007. This move ended up spelling the end of their relationship though, with Midori shortly after leaving Grape-kun for a younger penguin. This caused Grape-kun to isolate himself from the other penguins, clearly upset by what Midori had done. That is, until the organizers of his pen decided to put up a cutout of the anime character Pululu. He spent hours staring at her and was finally happy with his environment again. When he passed away that same year though, Tubu Zoo decided to make a cutout of him to accompany Hululu, which is now one of the zoo's biggest attractions. What do you think of these incredible stories though?